And we are back. It has been a while. Hopefully, you remember what we've been talking about, 6 months ago. But I am back on the mic today and extending said mic out to you, the listener. So, mostly today, we got some call ins pertaining to the Bronze Age episode that we have been kind of left off on. And after that, we'll talk a little bit about where I've been, where I'm trying to go, because I got a whole lot that I still want to talk about. I just don't have, just had some other stuff going on. I appreciate all of y'all listening, and I'm excited to be back on the mic. And from here, we'll get down to business.
Hey Taylor, this is Ben Gibson for Coldlight Press. I was going to go ahead and call in about my adventure site contest, but then you had to drop an episode about the Bronze Age, and now I only want to talk about that. It really is the best of all possible ages to adventure in. You mentioned all the sword and sorcery, but my word, there's so much more. The bestiary has all the monsters you could possibly want. It's assuming these heroes. The weak state formation. There's huge empires, but they're all weak and crumbling. Everything is perfect for adventurers to be going both into scattered Persian-style cities to all the way up to Rome. But everything in there is just perfectly set up for adventure. I cannot recommend enough anybody who decides to just do regular D&D. Just throw out your assumptions first of medieval Europe, and first and foremost look and see Greek in the classical era. You'll be shocked by how easy everything works. My next campaign is actually going to be in a very much not Black Sea region, set in a very classical style area. Everything with the Pantheon, everything with the monsters, everything with the aesthetics of the Bronze Age, bronze versus iron. Everything is perfect there. Thanks for representing us. Peace.
Very cool to hear your voice, Ben. Thank you for calling in. Now, the adventure site contest he's referencing did in fact happen. Some winners were declared, and there was some good stuff in there. I totally failed to submit something on time. I apologize, but I hope to make that up to everybody by putting out some new adventures on the blog. That said, I will link the adventure site contest in the show notes. I don't know if I've got the current one up in my browser right now or if I got the original, but that's okay. Y'all are welcome as listeners to check out his website and their product catalog on DriveThruRPG for Coldlight Press. Back to the subject at hand. I cannot agree more. I love the Bronze Age. It's not all, Egyptians and loincloths. It's not all sea peoples with horsehair helmets. Although those are cool things, you can go with so many aesthetics that work through this 1,000-year period of our human history. One thing that she touched on that I was excited about there is the weak state formation. Especially during the collapse period, you had multiple states that were competing with one another, but within themselves, they had competing sub-vassal states. So we talk about the Hittite Empire. The Hittites officially controlled the Arzawa, but the Arzawa were constantly a thorn in their side and regularly would show a different face than the one that the Hittites kind of hoped for when they had the opportunity. Further, you have some biblical accounts talking about the Assyrians, where they would come in and they had to put down rebellions constantly. That same sort of upheaval, that political discourse. I apologize if there's any sound effects in the background. We got some kids on the back porch. But yeah, it sets the stage. It's perfect for these outlying territories where civilization has kind of fallen apart due to the political infighting on the center. And then once your players get into a more domain mode, if you enjoy the politics aspects, there's so easily a campaign to be had in that politics sphere. So aligning the Bronze Age collapse and the contracting empires with Clark Ashton Smith Zothique style literature, a great book. I'll try to put a link in the show notes, but honestly, everybody who's listening to this will probably have heard of that. But it's a great parallel. While that is set in, I think, a more apocalyptic future where we're medieval fantasy. It's hard to describe Zothique and his writing. Great feel to it. The kind of what appeals to me from that epoch. That's awesome to hear that you're going to run a game in it. By the time this message is probably about a year old at this point, I apologize for taking so long to get back to it. So that game might have already been run. If so, I would absolutely love to hear about it. If you've got blog entries up with actual reports, if you've got AARs recorded somewhere, I'd love to hear it. Or if you want to call in here, I will 100% play your AARs on this podcast, which I think actually is the next set of calls we have coming up from our mutual friend Pizza. But we're not going to jump into there yet. I wanted to give you the proper thanks you deserve. Thank you again for calling in. Very cool to hear from you. And I'm excited for where you're going. Delve on, brother.
Podcast was pretty sweet. I gave it a good listen through. The thing that I would highly recommend if you're looking at Bronze Age stuff is Mazes and Minotaurs. It is completely free, and I think it is one of the best RPG supplements that you could possibly use for any campaign. One of the best things that they have in it is they have an entire island generator that you could even just make it a civilization generator. They have, you roll on these like insane amounts of tables for like what inhabits the island, and it's so far it's so abstracted, or I guess strange at points, that it's very outside the box, where you can get to an island and it's, peopled by, a civilization of beastmen that are overruled by a harpy, and, there's two oracles on the island, and there's a labyrinth, and that's all very, non-typical D&D adventure, where it would be more suited to, adventure sites than it would be dungeons, and it could really change up what you're doing. But it fits very well into the typical sort of campaign, and it's extremely gameable.
It absolutely is. I will put a link to the Mazes and Minotaurs website, or at least the download site I found for them, in the show notes. I was aware of this product. I swear I've skimmed through it in the past, but there are 4 books. There's the player's book, the referee's book, monster book, and then a second monster, or a companion book. I thought it was a monster book, but no, it's a companion book. So you have 300 pages or so worth of free stuff, as well as some other supporting material, including a adventure and FAQ. Do check that out, and I will be picking those up, checking them out in the near future, just to refresh whatever memory I may or may not have. On the subject of adventure sites, I love adventure sites. I love 8 to 12 room dungeons. Now, admittedly, you can use those as a lair, you can use those as a sub-level, and there's something to be said for mega dungeon or city crawl type play. I throw that in there because Pizza is a friend of mine. He's run one of the longest lasting city crawl campaigns that I know of in the OSR ecosystem. But the reason I bring it up is I'm a big fan of those kind of sites, just because they fit so well into a hex crawl / West Marches framework. If you've got to be back to town, or you desire to be back to town before the adventure session is out, you can hop in, get it done, hop out, string them together if you want to. I love me some adventure sites. And I've got a whole mess of thoughts on the smaller adventure 3-hour session kind of platform. There are folks out there who run longer, but I'm an adult, I have children, I have a family. I've got a whole nother episode worth of thoughts on that. So we'll keep going.
A second little note that I would want to add on to it is that, you mentioned Malazan. Malazan is a very strange book series. Having read all of the mainline Book of the Fallen and most of the Esselmont side series, I would say that it's really like D&D Americana. It's very strange the way Erickson writes his stuff, because everything is kind of, it's like a medieval version of Cowboys and Indians. But also like the Rulgistan and those like weird southern desert stuff. It's very like Iraq war, even though they have like a lot of the pagan gods and all this crazy magic shit going on. It's very heavily influenced by American and Canadian history. It's definitely a weird one, the way that Erickson sets it up. There's so many different like analog tribes to Native Americans. It's almost like jarring when you kind of like know where he's coming from. It's very different in those aspects, but I don't know. Erickson's a strange guy.
I have a bunch of friends who are big into Malazan, and I think that's one of the things I was talking about in that episode. And I thought I might have read some of his stuff, but looking into my library behind me, I was confused. I apparently had been thinking about the Magician's Apprentice series by Raymond Feist, which totally different author, totally different theme, and I have no idea what was going on in my brain there. But that said, I being a Malazan newbie, I feel like I need to dive into it. Now, you're not kidding when you're talking about that is the quintessential D&D trope. A lot of voices have said D&D always has been Wild West with fantasy trappings. It's European fantasy spread over the American West for distances and for themes. It's interesting stuff about the Iraq War, because especially if he was writing it during that period, now I'm definitely going to have to dive into it, because looking at his bibliography, his period of activity runs from 1991 to present day, so he apparently got both Iraq Wars. The important part that we're getting to is, now I'm very curious, and I totally get why so many people recommend that as an appendix and essential.
Other actually historical things that I would recommend kind of tacking on as well is like the difference of technology levels with certain cultures, where even though, the pinnacle of civilization, bronze is king, the bronze weapons and everything like that, there are still other cultures that run around that don't have access to bronze. I mean, one of the best examples, even though it's not Bronze Age, is the 13th Warrior, where, spoiler alert, guys, and Eaters of the Dead, Michael Crichton, very, very good book. It's the typical story of Beowulf. However, instead of Grendel being this evil, monster from the mists and whatever, it's literally just a Stone Age tribe, which is pretty neat, if you ask me. I really like the way that was done, and I think it could facilitate some really interesting sort of outcomes if you employ that type of stuff, where even if you start your players out as some some Stone Age randos and make it into they make their way into civilization as mercenaries.
And then once the players get settled, you give them the bone tomahawk treatment. There's a good idea for you. Or not. But talking about different tech levels, I've seen that done. Usually people like to do that with lizard men. For some reason, lizards are primitive in the common zeitgeist. But there's a real truth to that, because curiously, I've been working on my home Bronze Age setting a little bit, trying to flesh out some of the bits and pieces and readapt it to a usable map instead of a world level. I'm going to write my fantasy Heartbreaker in here, that map that I wrote when I was 20 years old. But talking about the Levantine Bronze Age, that is the Bronze Age in the Eastern Mediterranean, there was a whole lot of copper, not a whole lot of tin. And Egypt in particular had a whole lot of gold and a whole lot of food. It was very easy to grow grains along the Nile River and then on the Nile Delta, but they didn't have a lot of materials, so they had to trade for both of them. And one of the things that they were known for doing is using obsidian as an arrowhead instead, and one, it's sharp, so it's gonna work the same. Two, they're kind of small, but even if you have copper or if you have bronze is obviously king. But you can get away with using an obsidian arrowhead. It's essentially kind of a throwaway kind of deal. If you've made a khopesh or if you've made a socketed spearhead, that's a different story. But arrows you're assumed to kind of toss them. So there you have an example of one of the great powers of its day sticking to its roots in a sense, keeping with something that works and optimizing the resources they have. Which that's another cool thing that might be interesting in a larger campaign. Figure out the implications of international trade, or in a more points of light setting, what does the abundance of one resource or the scarcity of another imply for the player experience?
Popular games, you have really big gods. Obviously, like you have your Thors, your Odins, your Zeus, and everything. All these gods that sit on a high pedestal, and that's, I think, a symptom of a older culture. Whereas with Bronze Age, a lot of civilization was newer, like you mentioned with the coinage and stuff like that. That is stuff that's been around for so long. However, this was the beginning of these things. So you can have those old primordial forces, maybe, forces of nature, more inscrutable gods that are a lot more Lovecraftian almost, that are still like the large hammer to smash your head in when you defy them too much. But I think that's something that would be interesting, would be a more of an influence of smaller gods within the setting. A certain god of war ruling an actual civilization somewhere on the map, having a god of fate to be somewhere, hiding out in a cave somewhere that people go to that you can interact with, and having these newer, more quote-unquote human gods touchable, in the sense that to kind of, I guess, point out that civilization in and of itself is new. That, you could have a god of coins, as you said, where, these guys just kind of like started popping up recently, which could also give a chance for players to sort of carve out a little piece of divinity through the use of magics and questing and whatnot.
That was a recurring theme in a buddy of mine's D&D campaign forever. A lot of players would end up being divine presences or rulers in subsequent campaigns as he kind of time skipped forward. Further, that was a theme that I was trying to explore with my Kane and Busheland racial options out of my old Ash Coast games. They're both descendants of civilizations that have kind of cruel deities, but then have they've spread out due to disaster or whatnot, but making me want to run again.
Almost like Herculean, Hercules and his tasks, but on a smaller level where they can win some sort of demigods and have these forces, these holy forces, more at work in the world, especially I would say in the form of chaos. It could be a lot more interesting that the players set up a city in the middle of nowhere in civilization after a while, after creating trade routes and whatnot, and then a veritable god or demigod of chaos shows up to try to fight them and try to rip down their civilization and sow chaos into the world. I think that can make a much more lively experience, and actually even introduce the forces of law and chaos and the cosmic balance and whatnot a little bit more and a little bit better almost than a typical game.
Absolutely better, significantly better. Because you think about it, this all kind of ties back to it kind of going wrong in 1979 with the 9-point alignment over your OD&D and basic line 3-point alignment. People think of alignment as a Myers-Briggs for their character, but it's really not. It's how you align in this cosmic struggle. It is spiritual warfare put onto the tabletop. That's what it's supposed to be. When I was a kid, a lot of the Appendix N books were and this kind of dates me a little bit, because when I was a kid, you had to go to the bookstore and hope that they had what you were looking for, and if they didn't, you had to go to a different bookstore, and so there you couldn't go online and find it. You just had to trust that Appendix N was telling you what to go for, and just kind of maybe bring your book along and see if you could find anything on the list. But to get back to the subject, even in AD&D, where the 9-point alignment is kind of codified, look at demons versus devils. They're both evil, but demons are chaotic, residing in the abyss, and then devils are lawful and inhabit the nine hells. So these are obviously cosmic forces, and there is obviously a war going on between evil and good, and at the same time there's tension between law and chaos in the same kind of dynamism, and it introduces such an opportunity for play, for experience. We definitely need to bring that back, because if you do alignment right, it is so much more fulfilling than if the party does it wrong. I appreciate you calling in, brother. It's awesome to hear your voice, and I hope I'll be able to catch you next time you're down my way, or if work ever takes me up yours. In the meantime, delve on. Thank you again, callers, and thank you, everyone who's still listening at this point. So I wanted to take just a few minutes here at the end and kind of talk through where I was and where I am and where I'd like to go. Where I was, I'd been rolling a bit, and we had some stuff come up in life, and a buddy of mine put it this way: you make time for what's important. And I agree with that. There are just certain things in my life that were more important than the podcast, that were more important than the OSR. It is what it is. But I've also been thinking, apart from kind of falling into a new standard and hopefully being able to put some more kind of thought into it, I've been thinking about, why am I here? Why am I on the air? What put me in the position I'm in? It came up with a little bit of soul searching I was doing. Colossians 3, verse 17. In whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. In podcasting, am I giving thanks to God? In gaming, am I giving thanks to God? Now, I don't know what that means. It is not my intention to turn this into a Dragon Raid kind of scenario. It's too blunt, and I'm here for gaming, and I know you're here for gaming also. So I don't want to lose that core. I don't claim to be the next C.S. Lewis. I don't claim to be another Ricky Pope or Storytelling Ron, but I am just going to let it figure itself out. I'm going to let the Spirit speak, guide me to where I'm supposed to go, and kind of go on pinball theology. That is, if you've ever played pinball, the ball only has one place to go. There's only one exit at the bottom, and it can bounce around off the rubbers. It can bounce around off of and sometimes it gets stuck between them, and you get and your score just goes through the roof. But as painful as that can be for the ball, that ball can trust that there's only one way down, and there's only one way out of the cage. And that's where I think I'm going to take this podcast. I'm going to keep gaming. I'm going to keep talking old school D&D. And I'm going to let the Spirit guide me as to how we can fit that into a faith paradigm, and how we can give thanks along the way. So, thanks given to God the Father for bringing us together. I will also thank you guys again for putting up with me, letting me share this afternoon with you. And that, I guess, in between now and the next time we talk, delve on. And that just about wraps up this episode of the Whispering GM podcast, a product of Clericsware Ringmail and an independently operated production intended for educational and informative use, released under the Totally Steal This license. Some sound effects are retrieved from Pixabay, made available under the Creative Commons 0. Others are retrieved from Mixkit.co and used under the Mixkit.co royalty-free music license. Theme music is Blues Rock Energetic, downloaded from Pixabay Music and used under the Pixabay Content License, authored by user Mran, EMMRAAN. Parties interested in or with questions regarding the podcast are encouraged to reach out via the methods provided on the Clericsware Ringmail blog. Thank you for listening, and delve on.